this idea of superiority over the rest, to be the best in terms of your mind. And I feel as though I often fall into that, thinking I want to be someone who's known as being smart. The other, Helen, offers him all of Europe and Asia, actually, saying that you will be ruler over all of this, appealing to the sense that man wants to be the best in terms of ownership or have the most, almost a gluttonous aspect. And then Aphrodite appeals to his lust, and that's the one that I guess we can assume was the most prevalent within Paris, and therefore wins.
That's what you said is very interesting too about the different passions. I suppose going back to that scene with Hector and before Troy, one of the most haunting parts of that is, so specifically Hector is before the gates. His parents are entreating him, please come within the gates. And he then, in a very little Gizmoy-like situation, talks to himself.
Yeah.
And listen to these thought-like things, and decides to instead stay outside the gate.
Yes.
And that's the seal. That's basically when his fate is sealed. Achilles then approaches, and Hector, as you just said, decides to not fight him. Which why would he stand outside the gate except to do that? He runs around, and he runs around the whole city 3 times, both of them. And at the 3rd time, Athena comes down, the goddess of wisdom. And she is given permission by Zeus to finally seal his fate. So she disguises herself and says, I'm Deiphobos. We'll get Achilles together, I think. And Hector says, okay, with another person, I think I'm going to be fine. So he then turns, faces Achilles, and throws his javelin. And Achilles throws his, and he misses. They both miss. And then Hector, and to me one of the most haunting scenes, he then turns to Deiphobos, give me your spear, and Deiphobos is not there anymore.
And in that moment he realizes.
Yes, he realizes that Athena tricked him. That he had become a fool. I think that if I could put it this way, that he had chosen foolishness. And then he died
that's
in interesting.
Why you say that he chose foolishness, because I would almost say that he, even though he might have chosen in his mind, or his mind might have chosen for him to flee rather than to fight before he ran around the entire city.
Right.
Yet, in that instance, I don't think he chose to throw his spear because he thought that his friend was right next to him. That he really was tricked, and it was not his choice in that moment. There are other moments that we can say were his choice, but in that moment I would say it was not. I think that he was utterly tricked by not only Athena but Zeus.
Which is related to freedom. And so I guess what I would be tempted to ask in this moment is what then is the role of education in helping a student deal with his thoughts? But I want to connect it even deeper to what you've written, because it's good that you've made this choice, the paper about a choice, a resource for parents, particularly parents who aren't going to be familiar with the Iliad. But I have a pretty loose familiarity with the Iliad, and I'm a teacher, and I looked at the paper as also a resource for teachers. And especially toward the end, a couple social scientists are quoted, and they make use of language about what the school is obliged to do, and what the school and the faculty of the school is trained to do. So, what is the obligation and this is asked by a teacher to a student, what then is the obligation in light of what you've assembled as evidence that's very modern, and also what you've learned from the Iliad? What's the obligation a teacher has to his student in guiding him or her in not just the realization of who he or she is, but also how to battle becoming a pig or a rabbit?
And that's something I'm very thankful to have in my classes, because my student-teacher ratio is 1. And through that I can see the use of a Socratic method, you might call it, where there is no explicit curriculum. You simply say, here's a book, you're given check marks, of course, to benchmark your academic progress, but the class format is ideally a conversation that flows from one concept to another, hopefully through the guidance of the teacher, going upwards towards a better moral understanding in the end, knowing that the greatest education that a person can receive is one about their own soul, about the things that are not simply physical in our lives, but those which are of the most importance, yet aren't just a number on a test. I think that's the goal of a teacher, is to ensure the betterment of men, those men or women being the teacher's students, through the understanding that those morals should be what are most important in a person's life. As I would explain to someone who asks, why is faith important, I would say, one thing that everybody has in common is they have a conscience and they have a soul. And that means that they have the ability to make choices in their life, and that defines who they are, if nothing else. And the refinement of that soul is what education, in my mind, should strive for. It's a very outdated concept, I guess, but that's something that I tried to show in this paper in the underlying arguments. That this personal connection that teachers have when they have a better student-teacher ratio ensures that these teachers are not just giving them the academic performance that parents want in our modern age, but also giving them the personal level that is required to form in them their own person, their own personality, their own moral compass within themselves, something that is different for everybody and therefore requires a personalized education. I bring up a personalized education in nearly every proof of my paper, all three of them, and I felt as though I was repeating myself, but then I realized that we as humans are not only personal people, but we require other people around us to refine ourselves. Other people are like mirrors to us.
Mm-hmm. So I keep going back to the Hector before Troy with his parents. That to me is one of those amazing moments where his parents they're trying to speak person to person.
Yeah.
They're trying to relate to one another,
Mm-hmm.
and Priam and his wife say the most heart-wrenching things to basically like choose life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Hector doesn't even respond to them. He turns away from them.
Yeah.
First off, but and then he's just as his mind, I think, and he doesn't refute any of the arguments they gave.
Yeah.
He simply talks about glory and also shame as well.
Yes.
But literally none of the things in their
Yeah.
thing is responded to. So there's a breakdown of relationship between them that it's the foundation of life, because if he had had that relationship, he would have gone within the walls and had life.
Yeah.
Instead, he chose to be outside the home, and he was destroyed.
Yeah. And I think that ties directly to parental involvement. That's something that I mentioned a lot in my paper as well. But through my parents, I've recognized that education is merely a reflection of a parent's will for their child. If a parent's will for their child is completely lacking, then their education will surely suffer. No matter how hard the best private school in the world would try to educate this child, without the parental involvement, I believe that would fail. I was asked a question about this thesis paper being, which would be better, a public education with heavy parental involvement or a private education with very lacking parental involvement? And immediately I answered, a public education with parental involvement. I continue that by saying that the reason why I argue for private education is not because every private school is going to be better, but because private education ensures that parents have a choice of what education their child gets. And that this moral compass, this societal outcome that the parents want for their child, is completely dependent on the parents. That's why I keep talking about this choice that they make, where they have to decide the cultural priorities that they want in their child. That these schools offer them not only the benefits of higher performance, but also the moral compass and the personalized education that allows teachers to not only connect with the parents, but more importantly the student, to enforce whatever morals the parents want. And hopefully the teachers would share this moral compass, and through that, educate the child in not only academics, but society and morality.